my name is Patrick Mazza. I write The Raven, Substack.com. I'm a long-term activist. I've been at it too long, most of my life. I approach it from the standpoint of, my background is journalism. I've also done organizing work. I devote The Raven to right now, pretty much solutions in place has become my major focus. I've done a lot of work. I've really done a lot of work in my life on the recent decades have been a lot on climate. I'm also concerned about issues of war and peace, and our general state of the ecosystems and the state of our society. So that's pretty much who I am. Yeah.
Yeah. So last time we talked, the discussion was on one of the blog posts, Living in a Time of Catastrophe. Since then, as you sort of alluded to, you've kind of changed a little bit the way that you want to put out these blog posts from The Raven, kind of changed the focus, maybe, or the perspective. And you said specifically around this idea of, building in place. Do you want to just talk a little bit about what that means and how the focus is a little different these days for folks?
Sure. This has been, the idea of as my new theme line of The Raven, which I've adopted in the last couple of months, is building the future in place. I've been oriented toward politics in place throughout my activist journalist career. It's one of the reasons why I chose to live in the Pacific Northwest, also known as Cascadia, rather than orient to the national centers, because I think I felt that new ideas come from the margins, and you can really gain your own perspective, and you really have a chance to develop something that is not totally subject to the rules of the empire, as it were. But and so that's been a part of the theme of my writing since about the 2.5 years. It's not quite 2.5 years since I've been writing The Raven. But now I'm getting more specific. I've generally talked about the importance of grassroots politics, of building from the ground up. I'm now getting more into stuff that actually I have focused on in my earlier time, and never really lost a focus on it, but really, what are the specifics? How do we build a different kind of future in the places we live? What do we need to do? What are the community initiatives we need to take to build a different kind of economy and society? And from that, not being strictly localist, but to develop networks among us that help move change at broader levels. Kind of like the mycelial network of fungi under a forest that link the trees. So, I'm looking at stuff like public banking, social housing, development of solidarity economy, worker cooperative networks, building, finding ways to make the experience of eco villages more massive, more widespread. Dealing with the practical tools and resources we need to create a different kind of future. My thought here is that, I don't think we should stop doing what we're doing at national levels. I mean, I'm glad people are pushing for a climate emergency at the national level. I'm glad people are marching in New York City about climate. I'm glad people are organizing um, to for some justice for workers through revived labor movements. I think we should continue doing all those things. But as far as being really transformative, as achieving a genuinely different order of things, I think we need to start in the places we work and build community institutions that do that. Because it's pretty clear. I mean, this is, one of the things that has really moved me in the last summer. I've really been writing about climate since, you know, probably since around the very late 80s, 1990. And I've been, I was part of, it's been part of my activism for a long time. But this past summer, I mean, the extremes we've seen in temperatures, both in the atmosphere and the oceans,
Right.
the extremes of storms we've seen, people are calling this out. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
scientists are calling this out. We're way out of whack.
Yep.
So, I'm working with this. It's a kind of a life has so many paradoxical and contradictory aspects, and one of those is that the that we face this critical situation where action is needed now. It was needed years ago.
Right.
And I'm talking about something that's more, it's more a long-term transformative play. But I think really what I've learned about studying both nature and history is that there are stepwise changes. There are tipping points where things take off quickly. So I think one of the best things we can do is build working models in place. I mean, this is a thought of a lot of, I mean, the idea of working on climate at a local state level is, it's fairly commonplace now. Um, I think of what I'm talking about is getting to a deeper level, kind of finding ways we can detach from the corporate economy, finding ways where we can reclaim control of our own money and building models that can take off and potentially spread like wildfire as people realize the depth of the situation we're in. I have to look at where we're at. I have to look at the science, the storms, the facts, and realize we're over the line. I mean that I'm not talking a doomist thing,
Right.
but we're over the line in terms of avoiding extreme climate change.
Absolutely.
We need to prepare our places for what's coming. And that just doesn't mean the physical form of the places, though that's very important. It also means the social form of the places. We're going to need a greater level of human solidarity, of social connection, to deal with what's coming up because it's serious. And you look at the politics of the United States right now, and it's fairly depressing as far as what the potentials are. I mean, we did achieve in the last several years some major federal legislation that provides greater tax credits and loans for renewable energy, electric vehicles. That's all good, but it sure isn't enough. And how much further we get at the federal level in the immediate time, that's really hard to say. I don't know how much farther we get. I think our main place for progress on climate, on creating a peace economy, on creating a more equitable economy, on creating racial justice, I think those places are where we live, are the cities we live in, the suburbs, the towns, and so that's really where I'm going right now. That's what I'm writing about.
Yeah, and that kind of gets into the, one of the pieces that's discussed in um the blog post I was mentioning, with the idea of building future in place, was this idea of municipalism, talking
Yeah,
about Murray Bookchin. Do
yes,
you want to just talk a little bit about those ideas? I know there was a couple examples of kind of successful
right.
movements in that direction, and then a little bit about Bookchin.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of the 80s and early 90s reading Murray Bookchin. I knew people who'd been part of Bookchin's uh, enterprise. I wrote for a mag in the early 80s for a magazine in Portland called Rain, which was really about a lot of these topics. And Bookchin was an anarchist. I'm not a pure anarchist by any means, but Bookchin saw something called dual power, where through bottom up organizing, through organizing neighborhood levels, community levels, we would create community assemblies, congresses, where we would develop a legitimacy and a demand for for transformation at the local level, at the local and regional level. Out of that, and that what's happened in recent years, there's been it feels to me like a revival. I've been looking at a lot of this stuff, reading a lot of the stuff lately. A couple of places which have seen experiments in municipalism, which both reveal its potentials and its limitations, are Barcelona, Spain, and Jackson, Mississippi. In Barcelona, a group that rose out of the whole housing crisis, gained some power in City Hall and created a lot of reforms at the local level. Much better social services, community energy utility, trying to make more of the city free of cars. Uh, they've experienced some reverses because, ironically, they took a neutral position on the Barcelona independence movement, and pardon me, I'm having a moment here. The region in which Barcelona is located, I'm embarrassed not to have that on the tip of my tongue. I know it will come to me in a moment. Um, but the region in which they're located,
Right, right.
Catalan, has had a strong independence movement, which has the support of most of the people. And the government has come down hard on that, and they took a neutral position. And they lost some of their electoral strength. So they've had some reverses. They don't have the same power in city government, but they did show the potential to take power in a city government and make some changes. The other is Jackson, Mississippi, where you had a movement to to create a cooperative economy, Cooperation Jackson, which again took city government. They they had some problems with, and I'm still digging deeper into this, between the government, people, and the movement. This becomes an issue. So Cooperation Jackson is devoting itself to creating a solidarity economy based on workers' cooperatives. You've had over recent years meetings. Barcelona initiated something called the Fearless Cities movement, which has had meetings to kind of consolidate the global municipalist strain. There's been a lot of writing on it in recent years. It is, I'm tracking on it, and in some ways, I'm returning to something here that I spent a lot of time with in earlier years. Um, a lot of this is circling back to earlier themes. I've devoted in my time, some some work on, changing things at national levels. And I think state levels are very important too. I mean, I think in progressive states, we are making some real gains, whether it's Washington or Minnesota, where I live, or Minnesota, where you live. I think that's important. But the whole idea is to begin to consolidate, and look at the importance of organizing in place and what can we do to really create a whole picture. I see one of the contributions I hope to make. I mean, I see a lot of activity going on in kind of separate silos. And I'd like to figure out how you put that together. There's a whole movement for public banking, which is gaining a lot of traction, actually. San Francisco's moving toward it. Cities in California are moving toward it. There's been a lot of legislation introduced. And then you have movements for social housing, which aren't disconnected, but they kind of operate in separate silos. The energy movement, again, that's a separate silo. I think you're in the Twin Cities, right? You have the Institute for Local Self-Reliance there doing some great work on community energy utilities, community composting.
Yep.
And I don't, I'm not saying nobody is thinking of how these things work together, but that's where I really want to devote my attention as somebody who's participated in movements and had some experience in movements and how things do get siloized, how really to begin to bring things together on a community basis. And that's where I think, and this, Barcelona had this experience too of organizing out of neighborhoods, community assembly. I think that idea, that kind of Bookchin's original thinking, has some weight to it, where you create kind of community. You don't have all your politics oriented toward the electoral. You create kind of this dual power, which holds the electoral accountable. And Bookchin's idea was eventually it would supplant the state. I don't know, but yeah, at least you hold this. And one of the problems that happened in Barcelona that I've read is some of the main organizers out of this community movement went into the city government. So the community movement lost some of its juice.
Right.
So how do you, and that's really been a debate in left and green politics for a long time, the whole thing of movement and party. How do you hold if you're actually going to elect people to office, how do you hold them accountable and continue not just to work around election times, but to have a steady effort to say, here's what we want, here's what we want you to do, and to make the elected politicians the servants of the movement. So that, thinking at this point.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks are trying to draw these same lessons and look at these same pieces or similar pieces and see how it all fits together. Yeah, in the portion of that blog post, you had a section, I think, bringing all the pieces together. And you've touched on some of that stuff. I think social housing, is a big piece. Because just it has that ability to limit your travel for all different kinds of needs that you might have. It limits it allows you to rely on other people in that kind of space. You had the piece on new community forms, which is similar with the eco villages and cooperatives and co-housing and all this stuff. And then the governance was another piece. You talked about Bookchin, about you talked about dual power a little bit. I've definitely been looking into the idea around like parallel governments and things like that. And I think you mentioned some different forms like was a watershed council, I think, or
Yeah.
some other forms where, you know, the citizens can be playing a role. There's also I know um there's a law or a bill in, I think, in Australia that would give some oversight or voting power to the indigenous community, Aboriginal community in
Yes.
Australia, related to projects that would impact them. I
Yes.
guess it was kind of slowing down. There was a big demonstration by a lot of people in the country recently. I don't really know where that's going, but that's another piece, you know, building into the government, a piece where, you know, the indigenous communities have a direct input, or a direct piece of the input
Yeah.
going into that. There's also obviously, you know, land back is another demand, you know, giving um, you know, some or potentially all of the land back to indigenous communities to steward, whatever, you know, these pieces. I think a lot of these can work together, including the, you know, the parallel government, potentially the social housing, the cooperative housing, you know, being able to you know, be a little bit more uh have a little more self-determination over our housing and stuff like that would definitely
Yeah.
help in being able to govern ourselves directly a little bit better. But you have thoughts on that?
Oh yeah. I mean, you know, we right now, you know, I have the fort, you know, I'm one of those baby boomers who's fortunate to have an interest. I've got a minority interest in a cooperatively owned house. Um, my daughter, I live in Seattle, which is one of the more expensive cities now, and my daughter doesn't really, you know, she's actually over in Japan teaching now, but you know, if she lived in, you know, if she was would return to Seattle, she doesn't have a great chance to own a house
Right.
here, and a lot of people in the younger generation simply don't. And you look at what's happened to the rents in recent years;
Mm-hmm.
they have exploded far past the income levels, and this is a lot because housing has become a speculative investment by the private equity firms, by BlackRock, etc. You know, they see, you know, they want to take rents. They want this reliable rentier economy. The
Right.
economist Mike Hudson talks a lot about this. They, you know, investing in productive stuff. Well, that's less certain, but you invest in them in an apartment building. Well, you know, people are kind of trapped, and you know, you can charge a lot of times what you want.
Yep.
Now, if you have a large portion of the housing in the city owned directly by the city or by nonprofit co-ops, nonprofit housing um, organizations, then you have um, essentially something rent controlled. You have a, you know, you have something that puts a check on this private speculative economy, you know, by giving people another option. Then you talk about, I mean, and everybody points to the example of Vienna, Austria, as a prime example. And this came out of a, you know, the original came out of a period they call it Red Vienna, which is like the after World War One into the 30s, when you know it was a socialist agenda in the city to create adequate housing, and that got built on in the post-war era, post World War II era, and now 60% of the city people in the city are live in these in social housing, and unlike what we you know what we've associated with public housing in the U.S., it is mixed incomes, from you know low income to higher, even higher middle income, and you can be there once you have a place. You can keep it. You can be there permanently. You don't get kicked out at a certain point. So these can really be places people live. Then on top of that, if you look at not just creating social housing that's socially equitable, but looking at the newer building techniques, the kind of these, the the living building techniques,
Right.
the idea of creating buildings that generate most or a lot of their own energy, that capture water
Hmm.
and that process it on site. There's more and more examples of these kind of buildings actually working, and that are made with to the highest level possible with non-toxic and energy efficient materials that not just produce their energy on site, but are designed to minimize the use of energy. Then you get this whole other layer that's ecological, and as you mentioned, um, the increasing cost of housing, of rentals and housing in cities is driving lower to middle income people out of the cities to the inner ring suburbs, where it becomes very difficult, takes too much of the time of your day to use transit if you're coming into the city to work.
Right.
So people who would be most inclined to use transit are being pushed out to places where they're driven to get old beater cars, which are probably going to be, less efficient. So you've got that layer of, having social housing, ecologically constructed, that is in areas well served by transit, in mixed use neighborhoods where you can actually walk, to the store, walk to school, so you don't need to use the car or transportation
Right.
even very much. So you layer all these pieces on top, and then then you can get into the further of cooperative and democratically managed housing, where the tenants actually have some control over the housing as and have a democratic say in how it's managed. So you get all these pieces put together around creating and I think converting some existing housing into social housing. It's really important. It's one of the keystones of making this thing happen.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. The you end the towards the end of the piece, you're right. We need to build a society and economy based on kindness and
Yes.
mutuality that emphasizes cooperation over competition. If this seems lofty and hopelessly idealistic, it's the only realistic path forward in a world plunging into great disruption and deepening crisis. Um, it says if there really are solutions to a world like this, they rise from common kindness. I really agree
Yeah.
with that. I really appreciate you speaking with me and grappling with these issues because, like I said, I think we're all grappling with them. It's just a case of how much information we have and and how much time we have to talk through these issues and stuff. And I think huge masses of people, obviously, especially people experiencing these crises directly right now, from Maui to Libya to, I mean, heat waves all across the globe,
Yeah.
the warming waters, people are having to grapple with this stuff. um Again, I really appreciate you speaking with me. Is there anything else you want to share before you go?
Well, I do think that again, I think finance, public banking, reclaiming control of our own money is an absolute keystone. Why should your local government put their money into Wells Fargo or Bank of America or Chase, which is going to invest it around the world and invest in fossil fuel
Yep.
production and arms and stuff which is going to undermine your own city, with maybe exporting jobs from your city. Why should your city government not, or state government not, be putting the money into a bank owned by the city or state? Why, and why couldn't people put their own money, knowing that is going to be reinvested, not all over the world, but in their own area to improve life in their own area for stuff like social housing or worker co-ops, social solidarity economy. Very attractive. I think that is, if I'm going to, point to two really keystone pieces of this whole puzzle, it's public banking and social housing. I mean, there's a lot of others, but those are two of the biggies.
Well, I really appreciate your time, and they can find you at theraven.substack.com. Thanks, Patrick.
Yeah, and I could use subscriptions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Nick.